What is this? Package from Time Mountain Wellness. Could it be? Could it be? It is. It's my new Time Mountain Wellness shirts. Oh yes. I gotta go try these on. Oh yeah, that feels good. It's gotta be 100% cotton. Nice and soft. It's a little bit roomy though. Since I've gone low carb and started intermittent fasting, I've lost 32 pounds, so I probably should have got a large. And if only I had some other health and wellness items to go with it. Maybe another time. But all kidding aside, welcome to Time Mountain Wellness. You're either here in search of good, sound health and wellness information, or you're my mom just supporting her baby. Let's go with the first one. Today, we're just going to do a little intro on nutrition and try to set that foundation of why nutrition is number one in Whitmore's Big Five and why I think we can eat ourselves to disease, but we can also eat ourselves healthy. So with that, let's jump in the computer. Thanks for joining me today on Time Mountain Wellness. We're going to talk a lot more about ways we can improve our overall wellness. In some of our last videos, we discussed quality versus quantity of life. In other words, how well we live versus maybe how long we live. We also discussed aging and how we really want to slow that process down and age gracefully and ways we can do that. We discussed dimensions of health, the 6 dimensions of health, and how we should really take care of all 6 dimensions, not just focus on one. We need to be balanced for overall wellness. And then, of course, every time we kind of touch on Whitmore's Big Five, and just maybe as my kids in my health class may get a little tired of me asking, I just think it's that important that we're discussing these 5 things, because I think our wellness and disease and health really kind of are governed by these 5 things. But as I look at this and as I talk to my kids, I realize that this is kind of the pessimistic view, or the half-empty glass view of Whitmore's Big Five. Kind of everything's in the negative. So for those of you that are optimists, which I really am, I thought maybe I'd present a half-full version of Whitmore's Big Five. It really boils down to the same 5 things, but in this case, we're talking about eating right and proper nutrition and promoting our health and wellness. Coping with stress, not just the fact that we will have stress, and then talking about the effects of that stress, but healthy ways that we can deal with that stress. Exercise has been part of our psyche since really the day we were born, and certainly when we were young kids. Talk about how we have to exercise, and it has to be an important part of our weekly routine. And it doesn't matter if you're 6 or 86, there's an exercise program for you, and it's important that we keep moving. And then sleep makes up a third of our life. You think about it, 8 hours out of a 24-hour day should be made up of sleep. So we have to talk about ways that we can get great sleep, because so much of our healing and promotion of health happens during those 8 hours when we're sleeping. And then, like almost everything, comes down to the decisions we make. So we always have to make great decisions. So I think this may be a better way to look at things, but either way, we're going to be focusing a ton on all these things, and starting with what I think is number one, and that's proper nutrition. So today, starting with nutrition, I want to give you a little intro to nutrition. Now, I spend a couple weeks in my health education class, and certainly with the science of nutrition and all the information available, you could spend easily a semester or a year just on nutrition, but we don't have that kind of time. But I think it's important that you have just a basic understanding of nutrition. There's just a ton of science, but I'm going to try to break it down and give you just maybe what you need to really start moving in a healthy way of eating. We're going to discuss nutrients. We're going to talk about which of those nutrients are essential. And sadly, I've been teaching nutrition wrong, and I've realized that. And just as you are here searching for truth and answers to nutrition questions, I've constantly, over 28 years, looked towards teaching the facts and getting the best information I can. And I've been teaching it wrong. Now, I forgive myself because as we look, we're going to talk about the history of nutrition education and really, some of that has guided my curriculum in nutrition. And then we're going to discuss just briefly standard American diet and how we need to change that and how it stands for sad, and it really is sad. So that's what we're going to try to cover today, along with, at the end, some nutrition myths. I hope to dispel a lot of myths having to do with nutrition over the next several videos, but we'll dispel a couple today. So let's start with nutrients, and let's get a definition. So when we talk about a nutrient, that's the substance we get in food that provides nourishment that we need for growth and the maintenance of life. Without nutrients, we don't live. And when we talk about nutrients, and I have my kids learn all of these, we have 6 nutrients that we want to discuss. One, and it's always tends to be listed first. It's probably the most popular, most common. It's the one that kids can answer when I ask what are the nutrients, but as we'll find out, it's probably the most overused and overabused nutrient, but that's carbohydrates. Then there's fat, and don't confuse this for body fat or the adipose tissue that is formed when we get too much carbohydrates or too much food. The nutrient fat really is the lipids that we get from food. And then, of course, protein. Then there's vitamins and minerals and water. Those are the 6 nutrients. Now we further break those nutrients down into macro and micronutrients. So the top 3 are listed as macro. Macro meaning we need these in a little bit larger amounts, but more specifically, these 3 nutrients are the only ones that contain calories. And of course, what is a calorie? Calorie is a measurement of energy in food. So these 3 nutrients, carbohydrates, fat, protein, contain calories. But we'll also discuss how counting calories really is not a great way to decide whether we're taking or having good, proper nutrition. And then micronutrients, vitamins and minerals, these are things we need in very small amounts. They contain no calories, so they really don't provide energy, but we have to have those to maintain some of our body processes. We'll talk about that in a second. And then, of course, water. We know how important that is. So which nutrients, of those 6 nutrients, let's talk about the nutrients that are essential. Now, when I talk about essential, I mean that we have to have them and our body doesn't provide. So we have to get them from food. It's essential that we have them, and it's essential that we get them from food. So the first nutrient that's essential is fat in the form of essential fatty acids. Now, I'm not going to go into the specifics of why we need fatty acids in our diet. We'll do that, save that for another video. Protein, there's essential amino acids that we have to get from food, and those amino acids are the building blocks for protein for proper growth and muscle maintenance. Vitamins and minerals, and we'll discuss a lot of these again in future videos, but we have to have vitamins and minerals. We have to get those from food, and if we don't have certain vitamins and minerals, that can result in a lot of serious disease and deficiencies that affect our health and wellness. Water, as you know, is so vital to our existence. So much of our body is made up of water. You hear different figures, 55, 60% water, but really you think about the brain, you think about our blood and the plasma, you think about every individual cell, how much that's made up of water. And quite honestly, probably 85, 90% of us are dehydrated. We don't take in enough water. And if we could do one thing for our health, we would just take in more water. So we'll discuss about that. But those 5 are your essential nutrients. So which one are we leaving out? Which nutrient is not essential? Carbohydrates. They are not essential. Our body actually can make its own carbohydrates. It's amazing. Our body can't make those other 5, but our body can make carbohydrates. It's a process called gluconeogenesis. Gluco meaning glucose, neo meaning new, and genesis meaning production or formation. So this is literally a process where our body produces new glucose. And most of that's done in the kidneys and liver especially. I think up to about 90% are in the liver and kidneys, and then a little bit in our intestines. But our body can make its own carbs. So we do not need to consume carbs. We'll talk about other diets, and there's the ketogenic diet, which basically is only about 5% carbs. But we literally could live without taking carbohydrates from food. But unfortunately, we do take in carbohydrates, and we take in a lot. So let's think about some examples of carbohydrates, and they're all around us. You can look from bread, granola, tortillas, potatoes, pastas, bagels, and rice. And in many cases, we've been taught that these are healthy sources of carbs. As long as we make them whole grain, they're healthy. That's a healthy food. Other sources, milk, fruit juice, fruits in general have a lot of carbs. And then, of course, breakfast food, waffles and pancakes with fruit and syrup. And then, of course, you can go down the aisle of your local grocery store and see all the carbohydrate-filled breakfast cereals. And as you look in this, and again, it'll be another topic for video, the advertising industry is trying to reach out, especially in the form of cartoons, and advertise breakfast cereal to young children in hopes that we buy those. But we'll talk a lot about advertising. More examples of carbs, of course, we know some of the unhealthy things. Soda pop is one of the biggest problems in our children today. Gatorade, certain Gatorade products have been sold as healthy alternatives, but again, lots of carbs. Starbucks, the multi-billion-dollar industry, started making probably just black coffee, and now I'd assume black coffee with nothing in it is one of the smallest portions of their overall revenue. Candy and all the bad things that we've learned about that, junk food, and of course chips. So there's tons and tons of examples of carbs. And of course, what are carbs? That cube sugar, that table sugar. And just as we know taking spoonfuls of sugar is not healthy for us, but we have to realize that all those other forms of carbohydrates, though they take different lengths of time to break down in our body, they basically end up in the pure form of sugar and carbs. And this is a nutrient, again, that is not essential. Our body can make its own. So we take in way too much carbohydrates, but I'm here to tell you it's not your fault. Advertising, again, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, and they're telling us how we have to eat breakfast every day, and these healthy alternatives, the bagels, the cereals, all filled with lots of carbs. So advertising, just as in a lot of other industries, from tobacco to sugar to everything else, advertising plays a huge part in how we act and the decisions we make. But it's how you've been taught to eat and what is healthy. So going into that, let's look at a little history of how we have been taught and how we've learned what proper nutrition should look like. It goes back to the days of even the 40s and maybe even before that. But I did a little research on how health education and nutrition was taught back in those days. And again, this is from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the USDA, which still provides a lot of our health education. But back in these early days, you had the basic 7. And using my pointer here, you could see you had 7 food groups. Eat some from each group every day was the motto. In addition to the basic 7, eat any other food you want. So, in a lot of ways, they talked about eating from a large number of different groups. And in ways, that was probably healthier than some of the ways that they further developed. Then kind of later in the 60s and 70s, we had the 4 food groups, and it's really kind of what I remembered, probably in the mid 70s and late 70s when I was in health class. And there was those 4 food groups. And again, this was put out by the U.S. Department of Agriculture: the milk group, meat group, vegetable group, bread and cereal group. Then we got to the 1980s, and this is really when I got into college, but they developed the food wheel. And it was here they talked about the pattern of daily food choices. And it was during this time when we also were promoting a high carb, low fat diet, thinking that was the cure to our obesity and heart disease problem. They really upped the game for breads and cereals: 6 to 11 servings of breads, grains, and cereals, 2 to 4 fruit, 3 to 5 servings of vegetables, some cheese, milk, and yogurt, and then go really small on the fats, sweets, and alcohol. 1992, my first year of teaching health, we got the food guide pyramid from the USDA, and what a terrific visual this was to make it in the form of a pyramid. And obviously a pyramid has a base or a foundation, and again, the base of our foundation was breads and cereals, 6 to 11 servings. Most of our diet, according to the USDA, should be made up from this group: 2 to 4 serving, 3 to 5, a little bit smaller for milk, yogurt, and meat and poultry, and then use sparingly the fats, oils, and sweets. Fast forward to 2005, got MyPyramid. Again, here we added exercise, which obviously we know we need exercise and proper nutrition to be overall healthy, but still it was 6 to 11 grams, or excuse me, 6 to 11 servings of grains, vegetables, fruits, small sliver of sweets and fats, the milk and dairy here, and the meat and beans a little bit smaller. And then what we have today, again by USDA, is MyPlate. And you can see, again, a visual making up a plate, and the portions more of a pie chart type of what portion of our diet should be fruits, vegetables, grains, proteins, and dairy. And grains still, over 25%, but we're not talking about 6 to 11. So we're getting closer. So the history of health education has guided what you've learned and what I've taught. But getting back to nutrients, you still have those 3 macronutrients. In the past, I taught as much as 60% of our diet should be carbohydrates, and 25% fats, and about 15% proteins. But obviously, knowing what I know now and the effects of carbohydrates, I know that shouldn't be our top nutrient. And with kids, my 9th graders, I basically talk about being balanced. A third of our diet should be fats, a third proteins, a third carbohydrates. As we get older, I think less and less should be carbohydrates, but we'll discuss that further. But now I list fats as the number 1 nutrient. It's no longer the demon or the devil responsible for heart disease like we've been taught. And of course, proteins, the value of proteins can't be understated, but carbohydrates, of our 3 macronutrients, should be lowest in priority. Vitamins and minerals, of course, we always talk about how the need to get enough vitamins and minerals, and then taking in lots of water. So my nutrition lessons look a lot different now than they did even a year ago. Too much sugar, as I've come to learn and research clearly shows, leads to a lot of problems with our health. Whenever we take in any kind of food, there's a response by our pancreas to produce insulin. We get blood sugar floating through our veins, and insulin is produced. Now that's a normal, healthy response. But if we have too much blood sugar constantly flowing through our veins, we constantly have insulin and insulin spikes. And we'll talk about insulin more as we talk more about diabetes, type 1 and type 2 diabetes. But we know too much blood sugar causes too much insulin, which causes our body to become resistant to it. And insulin resistance leads to prediabetes and type 2 diabetes. And we'll discuss that in further videos. Our obesity epidemic really comes down to a lot of insulin. Insulin is a storage hormone causing our body to store fat and really largely responsible for obesity in our society. Inflammation. Too much sugar can lead to inflammation, and I'm proof of that. I used to be taking medication for autoimmune disease, which was caused by inflammation, and now that I've cut my carbs out, I no longer take medication. Again, future videos will discuss that. We used to talk about sugar being the problem with tooth decay. Now, though it's still a problem, when we talk about overall health and wellness, tooth decay may be lowest on the list. And one thing that we haven't really talked about, though, is sugar is addictive. And so, just like anything else, when we have an addiction, that affects our life negatively. So let's talk about a few myths. These are things that I have taught and that I no longer believe to be true, and research clearly shows that. Breakfast is the most important meal. We have heard that for years and years, and quite often at the beginning of almost every health education unit I've given, I've asked my kids to raise their hands who eats breakfast and who doesn't. And I've talked to them how it's the most important meal and they have to take breakfast in, because we've gone a period of time without food and we need that for energy in the morning. We've talked about glucose, how it's the only fuel the brain uses. That's what I taught. Now I know that's not true, that the brain can function very well on ketones produced by a process called ketosis. And just a tiny bit of glucose is needed for certain parts of our brain, but our body produces glucose, so we don't need that from breakfast. We also discussed kind of the standard American diet, that we now need to eat several small meals a day. Not 3 large meals, and don't skip any meals, but have several small meals a day. In other words, do some grazing. And then another myth that I've taught is that fasting is not healthy for us and it only slows down our metabolism. But I'm going to spend a lot of time in some future videos talking about an eating pattern called intermittent fasting. And while it's not new, it's being rediscovered as a healthy way to eat and a healthy way to cure obesity, type 2 diabetes, autoimmune disease, and a lot of other benefits. But I don't want to get into that quite yet. But these are just a few of the nutrition myths that I've been guilty of teaching. So that brings us to the question of the day. So knowing what you know now, think about what I've taught you, just the basics of some nutrition and what you have in your kitchen and in your pantry. Do you have too many carbs? Do you consume too many carbs? I know I did. And then websites of the day. I always like to share a couple websites. One I want to share with you is nutrition.gov. A lot of great information. And again, that's where you can find MyPlate. There's a lot of tools, tips and tools about nutrition. And then a really cool website, it's more of a YouTube channel, but it's called Med Simplified. And it's kind of a diagram YouTube channel that really breaks down some of these processes. So if you're interested in learning more about gluconeogenesis and some other things, they really break it down and make it simple, and that's anything having to do with medicine. So thanks again for joining me on this video. I really hope you'll subscribe, and again, I want to grow this channel. I want to help you with your health and wellness. And if you'll subscribe and share it with others that also want to improve their health and wellness, we can share this journey and go on this journey together. And I know YouTube really likes a thumbs up, so if you got some value out of this, click on that thumbs up. And when people do a search for health and wellness or nutrition, hopefully this video will be at the top of the rankings. And then again, I'll put out some more videos. We're going to talk a lot more about nutrition, a lot more about intermittent fasting, a lot more about carbohydrates and low carb diets, a lot more dispelling of some of the myths and changing the way that I've taught. So if you hit that bell notification, you'll know when I put out a new video. And as always, I try to also put this information in my blog at TinyMountainWellness.com. So check that out, share that around. Let's get as many people on the health and wellness bandwagon. Thanks again, and we'll see you on the next video.